Two ambitious women, one shot outside an apartment building.
They both had overcome a lot to try to be successful.
She was very loving. Whatever you would need, she was more than happy to give it to you.
Witness accounts describe an escalating drama, but reports of what happened depend on who's telling the story.
There was a brief, some disagreement.
A group of girls had jumped one female.
She pulled what seemed to be like a small handgun and shot.
She had no criminal record. The first time her name had came up in any situation.
The aggression, the beat down, that would make anybody afraid.
I was thinking to myself, this could be what triggered everything.
She showed her.
I think it created a divide in the city, but she didn't deserve to die that way.
June 26th, 2011. It's a quiet Sunday afternoon in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, when a series of urgent calls come into the Jefferson County 911 Center.
911.
Somebody just outside of Sunset.
Ma'am?
Somebody just outside of Sunset.
The calls were coming in saying that they had a shooter. They heard gunfire. People was running. It was a bunch of chaos. And they knew that one person had been shot.
So now please come to his apartment this Sunset. Please, this girl got shot in her chest.
Okay, it's a female that's shot in her chest.
Yes.
First responders are dispatched to a location on the west side of town.
When responding to those type calls, it's always in the back of your mind, is the shooter still there?
The first officer on the scene sees an older man administering CPR to the apparent victim. The man says he is a reverend at the church across the street.
He saw the confrontation and heard the shots. Shots really got his attention.
Looked over and he basically sees another woman with a gun and he sees a woman lying on the ground. So he goes over to render aid. When I arrived, the scene was secure. EMT was giving attention to the young lady that was not talking. They was rendering aid and getting ready to load her up into the ambulance. Given her name as Vanessa Bearden.
They were able to determine that she didn't live there. So part of their initial inquiry was to determine why she...
Home invasions with killing, drive-bys, and when we do, it's personal beef. It's not random.
Vanessa Bearden had no criminal record, no run-ins with the law. So you want to know who, what, why, and how. Just how all of this materialized.
Born May 15th, 1990 in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, Vanessa Bearden has deep ties to the community.
Growing up, Vanessa, she had a lot of love. She was surrounded by all her cousins and all her family.
They're a big family, and they're a Pine Bluff family. They are known for their church affiliations, singing group, the Bearden Singers.
We were country kids, so we like to ride four-wheelers. We're outside picking getting the eggs from the chickens, just running around.
Everybody knew Vanessa, and she just had a really big personality.
Vanessa was very loving. Whatever you would need, if you would ask Vanessa, Vanessa was more than happy to help you with it or give it to you.
She sought justice. She wanted to make sure that everybody was treated the right way, treated fairly.
In 2008, around the time Vanessa turned 18, the Bearden family faced a major challenge.
Vanessa's father had been sick for a little bit, but when he passed away, it was still a very big shock to our family, especially to Vanessa. It was part of her support system that was no longer there, that was gone. I think it caused her to kind of reevaluate a little, take some things more seriously.
She did grow. She became more mature. Vanessa did step up with helping me as well. So she would keep my children while I worked. That was about the same time where she met the father of her children and began a relationship with him. And she had two kids, and she liked to care for people. So Vanessa wanted to go on to become a nurse. I think it probably made her a little bit sad her dad wasn't there to see that happen. Vanessa was the best mom ever.
Their hair, shoes, everything was planned, everything was intentional because she loved those babies, and that was the way she showed her love.
As happy as 19-year-old Vanessa was to be a mother, the hardships continued when her relationship with the father of her children ended.
She did try to make that relationship work, but when she realized that it was not salvageable, that's when she kind of decided to explore other options outside of him.
Within the same year, her mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer. Her mother's battle inspired Vanessa to complete her training to become a certified nursing assistant as she raised her nearly 2-year-old daughter and 6-month-old son.
She had just starting her job so that she could continue taking care of her family. And, she had a lot of positive things working out for her right then.
But just as 21-year-old Vanessa's hard work is paying off, a tragic shooting has left her gravely wounded. And Pine Bluff police are trying to determine what happened.
They were able to piece together the approximate area in which the shooting took place, and that was based on them locating a spent 9mm cartridge.
We also retrieved the knife that was on Vanessa Bearden's person. The Reverend had taken it and given it to us. There wasn't any blood on it. I was wondering to myself, did she bring this knife to this scene with the intentions of using it? And it went bad?
As they begin to talk to people, they start getting into more specific questions.
According to some, it might have been related to a fight that took place 45 minutes earlier at a different apartment complex a few blocks away.
It was a group of college-age girls had jumped one female. And then you had a crowd of onlookers watching the fight.
They say Vanessa Bearden was one of the girls in that group and one of several people who recorded the fight.
I was thinking to myself, okay, she was involved in this fight. This could be what triggered everything. You want to know who, what, why, and how. So I want to know, did they know each other? What was the cause of the shooting? Was this a planned attack, or was she just in the wrong place at the wrong time?
Coming up, an eyewitness shares her version of the story.
She wrote her window down and told us, "You bitches come see me."
And the suspect tells her own.
She had been jumped, and she was just trying to protect herself from this group of girls.
Detectives in Pine Bluff, Arkansas are investigating the shooting of 21-year-old Vanessa Bearden. And news of the tragedy has started to spread through the community.
Another cousin called me and he asked me, did I hear anything about Vanessa being shot? And I told him no. So we all went to the hospital. We all met at the hospital. I remember sitting in the family room and the clergyman coming to pray with us. She's the baby cousin, and it's just not how it's supposed to go.
At the scene, investigators have just learned about a fight between a group of women about 45 minutes before the shooting at another complex nearby. A young woman named Colby steps forward and tells them she knows who shot Vanessa.
She identified herself and that Vanessa was a friend of hers. She said they witnessed the fight and partook in it.
Colby agrees to come to the police station and give a formal statement.
Could you tell me what happened today?
Before that incident happened, Vanessa Bearden was involved in an incident with Olivia Moody.
Colby says Olivia isn't someone she and Vanessa knew well, but she was involved in an argument with their friend named Alicia, who lives nearby.
She said that early in the day she was hanging out with Vanessa, and they noticed another friend of theirs, Alicia Jeffries, was involved in a fight with another young lady.
There was some disagreement between Alicia and Olivia. There were witnesses who tried to break up the fight, but it had almost that gang element of multiple girls jumping on one.
I have been knowing Olivia for probably 4 months, but I haven't known her well as friends. I've always known her to stay into it with people, saying something smart just to see if someone would come bother her. And today she got to fighting one girl, and Vanessa jumped in that fight.
So Vanessa jumped in the fight against Olivia?
Yes, which doesn't make sense to me because they don't even know each other.
A young man that they called Casey, he pulled Olivia from the fight.
That fight was broken up by a black male, and the black male dropped Olivia off in Sunset.
As he's removing Olivia, she is screaming obscenities. She is screaming threats at the group.
After the incident, Colby says Alicia went home and she and Vanessa continued on with their day.
According to Colby, about 45 minutes after the fight, her and Vanessa was hanging out actually at the apartment complex where Olivia Moody lived. They were sitting on a fence post in front of the building, and they noticed a white Tahoe riding through, and Olivia Moody was actually in that Tahoe.
They came past us as me, Vanessa, and a group of other girls and males were standing along the ledge. And Olivia rolled her window down and told us, "You bitches come see me."
Colby says they shrugged it off, but a little while later, Olivia sent them another message directed specifically at Vanessa.
A young boy, probably 8 or 9, he came through the hallway of one apartment complex and said that Olivia said she wanted the girl in the red shorts. Vanessa was the only one in red shorts. I stated to Vanessa, "Don't go," because I knew she had a gun.
How did you know she had a gun?
I was just saying because the type of person she seems to be, she wouldn't just call you out of a fight. So Vanessa reached to her side and tapped on her side and showed me a knife and said she not playing with her.
Colby said that she showed her the small knife that she had and said that she would use it to protect herself if she needed to.
Colby says Vanessa went to find Olivia and the rest of the group followed her.
Vanessa started to go through the same apartment building hall that the boy came out of. She got within 4 or 5 feet of the apartment, and I saw Olivia reach out from behind her pants and pull what seemed to be like a small handgun. It was silver. And she pointed up her gun and shot. And when I saw that, I ran. And when I ran, I didn't know Vanessa had been hit until I heard her yell, "Kobe, I'm hit." I turned around and I started running back. I saw a man, an older man, bent over, giving Vanessa CPR.
Okay. Did Vanessa have the knife out at the time she was shot?
No, sir. The knife was never drawn.
In my opinion, Kobe was believable. I believe the way she painted the picture and how everything went down.
The young man that Olivia Moody sent through that breezeway to try to make contact with those three young ladies was never identified. We're not able to determine who it was. Once law enforcement spoke with Colby, they had additional investigative steps. They wanted to see if they could find additional witnesses that could support the story that Colby just told them, and they want to find Olivia Moody.
Before investigators can follow up with anyone else, they receive devastating news about Vanessa.
She was pronounced dead at the hospital.
After hearing that she had succumbed to the wounds, this changed the whole dynamic of the crime scene. So now we don't just have a first-degree battery, now we have a homicide.
News of the fatal shooting of 21-year-old Vanessa Bearden has shaken the community of Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Family members gather at the hospital in mourning.
When I found out she died, it hurt me. It hurt me deeply. And I hurt for my aunt, and I hurt for my cousins, because she played an integral part in their life.
I was shocked when it happened because she's the baby cousin. I knew how much we were losing. And to us, she was not just another girl that got shot. When we went back to see her, they asked us not to touch her because it was a crime scene. And I think that had to be the hardest part for her mom and her sister.
As Vanessa's loved ones try to make sense of the loss, detectives are following up on a suspect in the shooting. 20-year-old Olivia Moody.
We come into the knowledge that she lives in Sunset Village, so we was able to track her down there. We found no weapon at the scene, so we wasn't ruling out the fact that she may still be armed. We knock on the door and she answers.
They obtained consent from Olivia to search her apartment. During the course of that search, they were not able to locate or did not locate the firearm that Olivia used to shoot Vanessa Bearden.
We take Olivia back to the detective office, back to the station where she's Mirandized, and we talk to her further from there. Her demeanor was, I would say, calm, nonchalant. She admitted to the shooting, but she's saying that it was self-defense.
Olivia confirms what Vanessa's friend Colby told police, that she was involved in an argument earlier that day with Alicia Jeffries.
We find out this revolved around the fact that Alicia was now dating a young man that Olivia Moody used to date. And apparently that caused some friction between Olivia Moody and Alicia. They had come in contact as Olivia Moody was walking down the street.
Olivia stated that Alicia and some of her friends, one of them being Vanessa Bearden, they colluded together to jump her and beat her till she was able to get out of their grasp.
who took photographs of Olivia's face, of her hands.
She did sustain some evidence of physical injury, abrasions, cuts.
Olivia says it might have been worse if her friend KC hadn't stepped in to save her.
Brian Gaddy was a friend of Olivia's. They called him KC. He was the guy that got her out of the fight. He was trying to break the fight up and get her out of harm's way.
After leaving the apartments, Olivia says she obtained a gun in case she had any more run-ins with the women.
Olivia claimed she had this gun for protection, and she was headed back to her apartment. And on the way there, she see the group of girls sitting on the fence post by her apartment.
Although Alicia had already left the apartment complex, that group did include Vanessa and Colby. Near them was a group of young men, and Olivia says one of them approached her, a man known as G-Rel.
G-Rel had some prior minimal association with Olivia Moody. In other words, they knew each other, but they weren't friends.
Olivia says G-Rel asked her about the fight, and as they talked, she decided it might be worth trying to de-escalate the tension through some of her friends.
She decided, according to her, to go talk to Vanessa and Colby to see if she could, I believe the phrase she used was squash the situation.
Olivia admits she brought a gun with her just in case.
Olivia says she had been jumped, she's been harassed, and she's been bullied. She was just trying to protect herself from this group of girls.
As Vanessa and Colby got closer, Olivia claims she heard Colby say, "Get her."
So she pulls out the gun, according to Olivia, to scare him.
She admits that she shot the gun in the direction of Vanessa Bearden. But Olivia claimed that she was trying to shoot a warning shot.
When she realized she'd actually shot Vanessa, she was in shock.
She just stood there near the body, and someone took the gun from her. She didn't notice who took it. Then she went to her apartment, closed the door, and waited for the authorities.
After hearing Olivia's version, I didn't buy the warning shot based on witnesses' statement that it was pointed at Vanessa.
After her interview, the decision is made to arrest Olivia.
Miss Moody was initially charged with capital murder. As I was filling out the paperwork and the ticket to let Miss Moody know she was being charged with capital murder, she made the statement, no, actually it was second-degree murder. And it caught me by surprise because I had never heard anyone make a statement like that.
While Olivia's comment reveals unexpected knowledge of the legal system, it has no effect on the outcome.
When there is a criminal charge, an arrest charge is called, that's made by the police. But the police aren't authorized to file an official criminal charge, an indictment. And in court, she was charged with murder one.
At this point, you want to find more witnesses to either debunk or solidify her statement. We was trying to collaborate the story that Olivia told us about G-Rel being at the scene, but we was unable to locate him. I was beginning to wonder if there was a G-Rel.
Coming up, investigators question their assumptions about Olivia.
She does not fit the profile of a cold-blooded killer.
And the residents of Pine Bluff begin to take sides.
The community stood behind Olivia, believed in her,
It kind of felt like being victimized all over again.
Just a few hours after the death of Vanessa Bearden, the young woman who shot her, Olivia Moody, is in police custody. Investigators suspect her claim of self-defense is a smokescreen for her true motive.
I think to a large degree that Olivia Moody had been embarrassed and she had been punked down, and that she was going to take action to make sure that everybody in that area knew she was not to be messed with.
Kobe had told us that the fight earlier during the day was between Alicia Jeffries and Olivia Moody. So now we need to talk to Alicia to find out what the fight was about.
When detectives speak with Alicia, she confirms she and Olivia are at odds over a guy, but she does not agree to a formal interview. To learn more about their issues, detectives dig into their social media.
They did not like each other. They had a pretty significant Facebook war in which they both said very terrible things about the other person. And that all surrounded by what was then Olivia Moody's ex-boyfriend and Alicia's current boyfriend.
Alicia started taunting and harassing Olivia, and tensions became high and it escalated into the fight.
A background check on Olivia Moody underscores the tragedy of the shooting.
Olivia Moody, she was born in Chicago, Illinois, came up poor. Her mother was addicted to drugs.
Olivia's mother let her family members raise her children as she worked on her recovery.
Olivia's mother is my sister, and in the beginning, me and my mom, we were taking care of my sister's 5 kids, and Olivia was one of them. And eventually, my mom lost her eyesight, so I ended up getting all the kids through DCSF and my mom, and it wasn't easy, but we made it. We made it.
Despite the hardships of her early childhood, Olivia managed to rise above her circumstances.
Olivia was very bright. She was a honor roll student in elementary school. She was always studious, and she was very giving. She was basically just a good kid. She didn't get in trouble. She went to school every day. She made good grades.
She ended up coming to Pine Bluff, attending University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff, and majoring in criminal justice.
She would have been the first person in my immediate family that would have graduated with a college degree. So, yeah, we was all proud of Olivia.
At the time, she was actually a clerk for a local circuit judge. Knowing Olivia's background, she does not fit the profile of a cold-blooded killer.
Detectives consider the possibility that Olivia has been telling them the truth about being harassed. But they need to determine why Vanessa was the one who ended up dead. Searching for clarity, they revisit the witness statements and discover a pivotal piece of evidence.
Vanessa and Olivia didn't have any type of relationship. They didn't even know each other prior to that day.
Vanessa did, however, video that altercation with her cell phone.
The video of the fight, it shows all the people that was around watching it, and it shows Olivia getting jumped on. She's pretty much helpless, and it's hard to fight against that many attackers. I believe that Vanessa was at the wrong place at the wrong time. Vanessa wasn't the one that Olivia was into it with. She just happened to be there. But I think seeing those girls that had jumped on her, I think it triggered something in Olivia. But I feel like there was other avenues that Olivia could have taken before taking matters into her own hand.
Although Olivia Moody has been charged with the first-degree murder of Vanessa Bearden, investigators now question whether the evidence supports her claim of self-defense. They hope the results of an autopsy will provide some definitive answers.
Vanessa's autopsy revealed that she was struck in her back left shoulder, and it actually exited through the front out of her right shoulder.
She was shot in the back.
It was not a close-range gunfire, somewhere between 6 to 10 feet maybe. I'm thinking, it's not self-defense if you hit in the back and you also flee. See, if Vanessa had pulled the knife on her or tried to cut her or stab her, then you would have had an argument for self-defense.
It's important to note that there's no evidence that Vanessa Bearden ever brandished the knife, much less threatened Olivia Moody with the knife.
As the story of Vanessa's murder and Olivia's arrest spreads through the community, not everyone agrees about Olivia's guilt.
I think it created a divide in the city because, you had supporters for both, and you had a lot of anti-bullying sentiments that was brought about for Olivia, and we had people that felt like Vanessa didn't deserve to die that way.
Olivia got to be the person that they looked at and said, oh, well, just because she went to college, it couldn't have been Olivia that did it. Vanessa had to have done something in order for Olivia to react like that. And it kind of felt like being victimized all over again.
Olivia returns to college while investigators continue to build their case against her. Then, 3 months after Vanessa Bearden's death, a new witness emerges.
An individual by the name of Gerald Allen or Gerald Allen. He goes by the street name G-Rail.
Olivia claimed this man witnessed the shooting firsthand, but police had never been able to find him.
G-Rail, the one we was looking for, he surfaced. He's locked up in jail on drug charges.
While he's incarcerated awaiting trial, he writes a letter to the prosecutor's office indicating that he has information. That letter's turned over to the Pineville Police Department investigators, and they go interview Gerald Allen. G-Rail was a material witness for the government. This case was heavily dependent on eyewitness testimony as to what happened.
G-Rail says that he sees Olivia shortly after the fight.
Olivia entices G-Rail to try to talk to those 3 girls and get them to come have some type of interaction with her.
Later on, G-Rail says he sees Olivia fires a shot from about 6 to 10 feet away, striking Vanessa. He also mentioned that Vanessa never made any type of threatening moves towards Olivia.
G-Rail did confirm that Olivia Moody shot Vanessa Bearden in the back, not only in the back, but as Vanessa Bearden was running away from Olivia Moody.
However, he seems just as conflicted about the shooting as the community at large.
G-Rail still believes that despite all that information, despite how everything played out, that Olivia still acted in self-defense.
He maintained that, but he was incorrect.
For prosecutors, the statement makes one thing abundantly clear.
I have never believed that Olivia Moody was an inherently bad person. I believe Olivia Moody did an inherently bad thing.
I honestly believe she got the gun for protection, but I think just seeing them at her place where she resided triggered something in her. I think she tried to bait them into that situation. I don't believe she fired a warning shot. I think she just pointed and fired.
But they know the outcome of any trial, especially one this controversial, is uncertain.
Going into trial, I had my concerns about the public opinions because you don't know how that would affect the jury.
Nearly 1 year after Vanessa Bearden's death, the young woman who shot her, Olivia Moody, goes on trial for murder.
The trial began May 16, 2012, and the courtroom is packed. There's a lot of supporters there for Olivia. There's supporters there for Vanessa.
Our defense was self-defense. We tried to use the aggression, the beat down, that would make anybody afraid. She was protecting herself against further beat down.
General argument by the prosecution is that it can't be self-defense if the victim is fleeing and is no longer a threat to you.
You have to prove state of mind in order to say you fearfully of your life. And the only way we could establish that was to put her on the stand. But anytime you put a criminal defendant on the stand, it is just high risk.
Before Olivia takes the stand, prosecutors attempt to negotiate a plea deal, reducing the charges from first-degree murder to manslaughter. But Olivia refuses the deal.
She would have gotten 4 years probation, reduced to manslaughter, with the right of expungement of record. Had that happened, she would have been placed in a car that day with her family going back to Chicago.
Olivia Moody took the stand. She was faced with tough questions that she did not have an answer for. Why she got a gun, why she went to them. And then the defense was done presenting their evidence, and we gave closing statements. But the jury deliberated and came back with a verdict of guilty on one count of second-degree murder. I believe it was very clear to the jury that this was not a case of self-defense. Not at all. This was an extreme manifestation to in indifference to the value of human life, which is what second-degree murder is.
The verdict was very hard. It was very hard. Olivia was very strong. She didn't cry, you know. She was trying to comfort us, matter of fact.
The guilty verdict felt like not what we believed she deserved, but there was some kind of justice.
She received 30 years and was eligible for parole and 7.5 years with good behavior. I felt like justice was served, but in the end, you had 2 families destroyed. Vanessa and Olivia, they both come from rough backgrounds. They both had overcome a lot to try to be successful. They both had bright futures ahead of them. And this situation just changed the trajectory of their both futures.
We talk about Vanessa pretty often, remembering the good things, laughing about the things that were funny, and telling the stories, making sure that her children are brought up in an environment of love.
Vanessa was a person that never got to live up to her potential. A lot of times when I have seen interviews or even while I was in court, she was always referred to as that girl. But she's Vanessa to us. She's a mom. She's a sister. She's a daughter. She belongs to somebody. She's still here with us. She's still a person. We still believe that Vanessa should have been able to live her life peacefully.
The call came in at 10:42 p.m., and nothing in that quiet Texas town would ever sound the same again. A mother's voice, breaking, collapsing into static, words barely forming, panic flooding every syllable. She's gone. She was just here. The door, it was open. Dispatch logged it as a missing juvenile. Routine, at least on paper. But something in that call didn't feel routine. Something raw, immediate, wrong. By the time deputies arrived, the night had already swallowed the street. Porch lights flickered on one by one, like eyes opening in the dark. Neighbors stepped outside, drawn by sirens, by instinct, by something they couldn't yet name. The Carter house stood still. Too still. No broken glass. No forced entry. No overturned furniture. Just a front door slightly ajar, moving with the slow breath of the summer air. Inside, everything looked untouched, except for one room. Emily Carter's bedroom. Lights on. Bed half made. A book open, face down, like it had been dropped mid-sentence. Her shoes still by the door. Her phone left behind. Everything in place except her. 16 years old. No history of running away. No late-night habits. No secrets anyone could point to. She was the kind of girl people trusted. The kind of girl who didn't just vanish. But she did. And within minutes, that house stopped being a home. It became a scene. The first hour moved fast. Questions fired. Parents shaking. Timelines reconstructed in fragments. The last time anyone saw her, around 9:30 p.m., she had been home. Alive. Safe. Or, at least, it looked that way. Then nothing. No scream. No struggle. No sign of a fight. Which meant one thing. Whoever took her didn't have to force their way in. Outside, the town was already gathering. Flashlights cutting through fields. Engines idling along dirt roads. Voices calling her name into the night, like it might answer back. Emily. Emily, can you hear us? But the darkness stayed silent. Search teams expanded. Dogs brought in. Helicopters scanning from above. Every inch of land within miles was combed, searched, researched. Hours turned into something heavier. Something slower. Hope stretched thin. And then, on the second day, they found her. Not far. That was the part that hit hardest. Less than a mile from her own home. A place people passed without thinking. A strip of woodland just off a narrow road. Familiar. Ordinary. Until it wasn't. She had been hidden. Not carefully. Not professionally. Just enough to delay discovery. Just enough to buy time. The scene shifted instantly. What started as a missing person case became something colder. Something irreversible. Murder. The autopsy was clinical, detached. But beneath the language, the reality was brutal. There were signs of restraint, controlled movement, no evidence of prolonged struggle, which only deepened the question. How? How does someone take a 16-year-old girl from her home without a sound? And then came the detail that would define everything that followed. DNA. Recovered. Preserved. Logged. In 1994, that meant possibility, but not certainty. The science existed, but the system didn't.
No massive databases.
No instant matches. Just samples, waiting for a future that hadn't arrived yet. Investigators moved forward anyway. They had to. They started close. Family first. Always. Painful, invasive, necessary. But nothing surfaced.
No inconsistencies. No hidden tensions.
Just grief, raw, visible, undeniable. Then the circle widened. Friends.
Classmates. Teachers.
Anyone who had spoken to Emily in the last 48 hours. Every conversation replayed. Every detail questioned. Still nothing.
No threats.
No suspicious behavior. No sign she was afraid. Which brought them back to the same conclusion over and over again. She knew him. Because it had to be a him.
Statistically.
Behaviorally. Everything pointed in one direction. And she trusted him. That was the part no one wanted to say out loud. The suspect wasn't a stranger passing through. He wasn't some faceless outsider drifting in from nowhere. He was already there. In the neighborhood, on the street, maybe even in the search party. Watching. Listening. Waiting. One name began to surface, not loudly, not dramatically, but persistently. Daniel Reeves. 38.
Divorced.
Lived 2 houses down from the Carters.
Known. Familiar.
Safe by all outward appearances. He was the kind of man people waved to, without thinking. The kind who fixed things, helped out, showed up when needed. Quiet, but present. Too present, some would later say. Witnesses remembered seeing him that night. Not unusual, he lived there. But the timing, it blurred at the edges. His statements shifted just slightly. Not enough to accuse. Just enough to notice. Investigators brought him in. The interview room was small, neutral, designed to reveal more than it concealed. Daniel sat calmly, hands folded, voice steady. He answered every question. Where he was, what he saw, what he heard. Nothing broke. No contradictions strong enough to hold. No physical evidence tying him to the scene. No DNA match in the system. And that was the problem. Because suspicion isn't proof.
So he walked out.
And with him, something else left the room. Momentum. Weeks passed. Leads dried up. Tips flooded in, then collapsed under scrutiny. Every direction investigators pushed led to the same dead end.
No suspect. No arrest.
Just a growing silence around a case that refused to move. The town didn't forget. It couldn't. Emily's face stayed everywhere. Posters, news segments, candlelight vigils. Her name became something heavier than a memory. It became a question no one could answer. Years went by. The file thickened, but the truth stayed buried.
Detectives changed.
Priorities shifted. Resources moved elsewhere. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the case transitioned into something colder. A cold case.
Stored. Archived.
Waiting. The evidence box was sealed, labeled, placed on a shelf where time collects dust and urgency fades. But it didn't disappear. It waited. For nearly 30 years. Until someone decided to open it again. Not because of a new witness. Not because of a confession. But because of something else. Something the original investigators never had.
Time.
And the science that came with it. A new detective. Different approach.
No assumptions.
No emotional attachments to past theories. He didn't start with suspects. He started with the evidence. Inside that box was the same DNA collected in 1994, untouched, preserved like a message sent forward through time. Back then, it was a dead end. Now it was a doorway. Genetic genealogy changed everything. Not a direct match, but a network. A web of connections stretching across families, across generations. The DNA didn't need to match a suspect. It only needed to whisper in the direction of one. The results came back slowly. Fragments at first. Distant relatives. Shared markers. Nothing definitive. Until the pattern began to narrow. Branches trimmed. Names eliminated. Paths refined. And then a familiar name resurfaced. Daniel Reeves. Not because he was in the database,
but because someone connected to him was.
A partial match. Enough to build a profile. Enough to bring his name, long buried in old reports, back into focus. This time, investigators didn't rely on interviews. They relied on patience.
Surveillance.
Observation. They watched him move through his life. Ordinary. Routine. Unremarkable. Just like before. And then, quietly, without confrontation, they collected what they needed. A discarded item. Something he touched. Something he left behind without thinking. DNA.
Sent to the lab.
Tested against a sample from 1994. And this time the silence broke. It wasn't partial. It wasn't inconclusive. It was exact. A match. After nearly 3 decades, the evidence finally said what no witness ever could. He had been there. Inside that house. On that night. The neighbor, the helper, the man no one suspected enough. He had never left. He had just blended in. And when the arrest finally came, it didn't feel like closure. It felt like impact. Because the truth didn't arrive gently. It shattered everything people thought they understood about safety, about familiarity, about the idea that evil looks different. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it looks exactly like someone you trust. And that's what makes it stay hidden for so long. The arrest didn't happen with sirens.
No flashing lights. No dramatic chase.
Just a quiet morning, the kind Texas had seen thousands of times before. Sun low. Air still, birds cutting across an empty sky as if nothing beneath them had changed. But everything had. Daniel Reeves stepped out of his house like he had every other day for nearly 30 years. Same routine, same rhythm.
Familiar, predictable, invisible.
Until it wasn't. Unmarked vehicles were already in position. Officers moving with precision, not urgency.
No noise.
No warning, just a shift in gravity, subtle, but undeniable. When they approached him, there was no confusion on his face.
No shock, no instinctive denial.
Just a pause, a fraction of a second where something behind his eyes flickered then disappeared. They read the warrant. DNA match, 1994, Emily Carter. For a moment, the air seemed to tighten around him. Not panic, not anger, something quieter, something colder. Acceptance. He didn't run.
He didn't resist.
He simply nodded once, as if a clock he had been listening to for decades had finally stopped ticking. The cuffs clicked into place, and just like that, a man who had lived unnoticed for 30 years became the center of a story no one in that town could escape. News spread fast. Faster than it ever had in 1994. Phones lit up. Screens filled with headlines. Words people hadn't spoken out loud in years suddenly returned with force. Cold case. DNA breakthrough. Arrest. But one phrase hit harder than all the others. Trusted neighbor. Because it reframed everything. Every memory. Every interaction. Every small, ordinary moment that now felt contaminated by something unseen. People remembered him differently now. The way he waved from his driveway. The way he joined search parties. The way he stood just close enough to be helpful, but never close enough to be questioned. It wasn't just that he had been there. It was that he had always been there. Watching the investigation unfold. Listening to theories. Hearing his own name surface and disappear again. And never once stepping out of line. Inside the interrogation room, Nothing had changed. Same walls, same table, same quiet hum of fluorescent lights. But this time, the balance of power had shifted. The detective across from him wasn't looking for inconsistencies anymore. He already had the truth. Daniel sat with his hands folded again, just like he had decades earlier. Same posture, same calm exterior. But time had added something else.
Wait.
You know why you're here, the detective said. A statement, not a question. Daniel didn't answer immediately. His eyes drifted not toward the door, not toward the camera, just somewhere slightly off-center, like he was listening to something only he could hear. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. I figured this day might come. Not denial. Not shock. Just inevitability. The detective let the silence stretch. Silence had a way of forcing truth to surface, filling space where lies usually hide. You were in that house, he said. Another statement. Another pause. Daniel exhaled slowly. Not a sigh, more like a release of something he had been holding in for years. I didn't plan it, he said. For words. And suddenly, the entire case shifted again. Because those words didn't close anything. They opened everything. The detective leaned forward slightly. Not aggressive. Focused. Then tell me what happened. And for the first time in nearly 30 years, the story began to move. But not cleanly. Not clearly. Fragments came first. Broken pieces of a night that refused to align into something simple. He said he saw her earlier that evening. Outside. Brief interaction. Casual. Nothing unusual. He said he went home. He said he came back. That was where things started to blur.
Why?
The question hung in the room, heavy and unanswered. Daniel's explanation shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough to fracture its own structure. He mentioned a conversation. Then uncertainty. Then silence. The detective didn't interrupt. Because inconsistency wasn't weakness anymore. It was confirmation. You went inside, the detective said. Daniel nodded. Not quickly. Not reluctantly. Just once. Yes. No forced entry.
No struggle.
Because she let him in. That detail settled into the room like something permanent. Something irreversible. A girl, 16 years old, opening her door to someone she recognized. Someone she didn't fear. Someone she trusted. The detective let that sit before moving forward. What happened next? Daniel's hands tightened slightly. First visible shift in his composure. I don't remember everything, he said. And there it was. Not a denial of the act. A denial of clarity.
A gap.
Whether real or constructed, it didn't matter. Because the physical evidence already told its own version of events. Restraint.
Control.
Movement. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't chaos. This was action. You took her, the detective said. Another nod. Slower this time. Yes. The room felt smaller now, air heavier. Every word pulled something buried closer to the surface. Why? This time, Daniel didn't answer. Seconds passed. Then minutes. Silence expanding until it almost became its own presence in the room. Finally, he spoke. I don't know. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't offensive. It was empty. And that emptiness was more unsettling than any detailed confession could have been. Because it meant there was no clean explanation. No motive that could be pointed to, labeled, understood. Just an action. A choice. And the consequences that followed. The detective shifted direction. After, he said. What did you do after? Daniel's gaze dropped to the table. I drove.
Where?
Away. How far? I don't remember. But the evidence said otherwise. The location where Emily was found wasn't random. It wasn't distant. It was close.
Familiar.
A place someone local would know. A place chosen, not stumbled upon. You brought her back, the detective said. Daniel didn't respond. But he didn't deny it either.
And that was enough.
Outside the interrogation room, the case was already rewriting itself. Reporters digging through archives. Old footage resurfacing. Interviews from 1994 playing again, but now with a different lens. Daniel Reeves appeared in some of them. Standing in the background. Talking to neighbors. Answering questions. His voice, calm and concerned, now layered with something else.
Context.
And context changed everything. Back inside, the interrogation slowed. Not because there was nothing left to ask, but because the truth, once it starts emerging, doesn't always come in a straight line. Sometimes it drips. Sometimes it resists. Sometimes it hides behind the very person revealing it. But one thing was no longer in question. He had done it. The DNA didn't just suggest it. It confirmed it. And with that confirmation came something the Carter family had been waiting for since 1994. An answer. But not the kind they imagined. Because knowing who doesn't always explain why. And it doesn't undo what was taken. In the days that followed, the town shifted. Not visibly at first. No immediate change in routine.
No sudden silence.
But underneath something had cracked. Conversations turned quieter. Eyes lingered longer. Familiar faces carried unfamiliar weight. Because everyone had a memory of him. A moment. A conversation. And now, every one of those moments had to be re-examined. Reinterpreted. Re-understood. Trust doesn't break loudly. It fractures slowly. And when it finally gives way, the sound echoes long after. For nearly 30 years, the truth had lived in plain sight. Not hidden in shadows. Not buried in distance. But woven into the fabric of everyday life. And now that it had been pulled free, everything around it began to unravel. The town didn't erupt. It tightened. Like something pulling inward, compressing under the weight of a truth no one was ready to hold. Streets looked the same. Houses unchanged. Lawns trimmed. Cars parked where they always had been. But nothing felt familiar anymore. Because now every memory had a shadow. Every wave from a driveway. Every casual conversation. Every moment Daniel Reeves had stood within arm's reach of someone, all of it rewrote itself in real time. And the deeper investigators dug, the more that shadow stretched backward. They didn't start with the crime. They started with him. Daniel Reeves, before 1994. Before the arrest. Before the name became something people whispered instead of said out loud. Records painted a quiet picture. Born in Texas. No major incidents.
No arrests.
No obvious red flags. A life that moved in straight lines: school, work, marriage, divorce. Ordinary. Predictable. Invisible. But ordinary doesn't mean empty. And invisible doesn't mean harmless. Neighbors described him the same way, over and over again. Helpful. Quiet. Kept to himself. The kind of descriptions that sound safe until you realize how little they actually say. Because no one described him as close. No one described him as known. Just present. Always present. Investigators pulled old interviews from 1994. Hours of recorded conversations. Notes scribbled by detectives long retired. Transcripts yellowed at the edges, but still holding fragments of something unfinished. Daniel's name appeared more than once. Not as a suspect, as a witness. That detail alone was enough to slow everything down, because it meant he hadn't just been near the case. He had been inside it, talking to investigators, answering questions, offering observations, standing just close enough to shape the narrative without ever becoming part of it. They replayed one interview in particular. Audio distorted by time, but still clear enough to hear his voice.
Calm.
Measured. Cooperative. I didn't see anything unusual, he had said. At the time, it meant nothing. Now, it sounded different. Now, it sounded like control. Investigators began mapping his movements in the years after 1994. Not looking for more crimes, there were none tied to him. Not looking for escalation, there was no clear pattern. That was what made it harder. Because there was no trail. No series.
No repetition.
Just one night. One decision. One act that shattered everything and then disappeared into decades of silence. But silence isn't the same as absence. They spoke to people who had known him over the years. Coworkers, neighbors, casual acquaintances. The answers were consistent until they weren't. Some remembered small things. Moments that didn't matter then.
But did now.
A neighbor recalled how Daniel avoided certain conversations when Emily's name came up. Not abruptly, just subtly. A shift in tone. A redirection. Another remembered how he stopped attending community events a few years after the murder. Not immediately, gradually. As if something had changed, or as if he needed distance. A former coworker described him as controlled. Not in a negative way. Just precise. Measured, rarely emotional. At the time, it sounded like professionalism. Now, it sounded like restraint. The kind of restraint that doesn't start overnight. The kind that builds. Investigators returned to the physical evidence. Not just the DNA. Everything. Photos from the scene, angles, distances, positions, the placement of the body. The method of concealment, the timeline between abduction and discovery. Because even without a confession, behavior leaves patterns. And patterns tell stories. The location where Emily was found wasn't random. It was chosen. Close enough to control time. Far enough to delay discovery. Familiar enough to navigate in darkness, without hesitation. That meant knowledge. Local knowledge. Daniel had it. But so did others. Which brought the investigation back to a question that had never fully gone away. Was he alone? The original case never proved there was more than one person involved. No additional DNA. No signs of multiple offenders. But the absence of evidence isn't proof of absence. And now, decades later, the margins for certainty were thinner. They re-examined timelines again. Minute by minute. Emily last seen at 9:30 p.m. Call at 10:42 p.m. A window. Not large. But enough. Could one person do everything within that time frame? Enter the house. Gain control. Remove her without a sound. Transport. Conceal. Return. Disappear. The answer wasn't impossible, but it wasn't simple either. Back in the interrogation room, that question surfaced again. Did anyone help you? The detective asked. Daniel didn't look up.
No.
Immediate.
Flat. No hesitation.
But denial, on its own, doesn't close a door. It just keeps it from opening easily. Investigators pressed further. You had limited time. Silence. You knew the area. A slight nod. You moved without being seen. Another pause. Then, I was careful. 3 words. And suddenly something sharpened. Because careful isn't accidental. It's deliberate. It suggests awareness. Planning. Even if he claimed there was none. The contradiction hung in the air, unresolved. But it didn't need to be resolved completely. Not yet. Because the case wasn't just about reconstructing that night. It was about understanding how it stayed hidden for so long. How a man could commit an act like that and then step back into life as if nothing had happened. They looked at his behavior after the murder. The days immediately following. He joined search efforts. Spoke to neighbors. Stayed visible. Not withdrawn. Not panicked. Present. That detail mattered. Because it meant he didn't disappear into isolation. He inserted himself into the narrative. Close enough to monitor it. Close enough to adjust. Close enough to know when suspicion drifted away. And it did. Because without evidence, suspicion fades. Even when it lingers. Years later, he moved houses. Not far. Still within the same town. Still within the same orbit. As if distance wasn't necessary. Or as if he believed it wasn't. Investigators found no record of him ever leaving Texas for long periods.
No sudden relocations.
No drastic life changes. Just continuity. A life that flowed forward without interruption. Except for one thing. He never spoke about that night again. Not publicly. Not privately. At least not in any way anyone remembered. It became something unspoken. And in small towns, silence has a way of becoming its own agreement. Don't ask. Don't revisit. Don't reopen. Until something forces it open. And DNA had done exactly that. Back in the present, the case moved toward prosecution. Charges filed. Evidence prepared. The narrative shifting from investigation to courtroom. But something still lingered beneath all of it. Not doubt about guilt. That was clear now. But something else. Something harder to define. Because the deeper they looked, the less this case fit into a simple category. It wasn't a pattern killer. It wasn't a crime driven by visible motive. It wasn't even a story that offered clean answers. It was something more unsettling. A single act. Committed by someone who didn't outwardly fit the role. Hidden in plain sight. And carried silently for decades. The Carter family faced a reality they had waited for and feared. They knew who. But they still didn't know why. And sometimes that question matters more. Because who ends the search? But why never really does. As the town prepared for what came next, the air shifted again. Not relief. Not closure. Something heavier. Because the truth had surfaced. But it hadn't settled. And it wouldn't. Not yet. The courtroom didn't feel like a place for answers. It felt like a place where silence had finally been forced to speak. Wooden benches filled slowly that morning, not with curiosity, but with something heavier. People who had lived through 1994. People who had grown up hearing Emily Carter's name like a ghost that never left. And people who had known Daniel Reeves without ever really knowing him. He sat at the defense table, still the same man they remembered, and yet not. Same posture, same stillness. But now every movement carried meaning. Every glance was analyzed, dissected, interpreted. Because now everyone was looking. The prosecution didn't begin with emotion. They began with time. July 1994, the attorney said, voice steady, controlled. A 16-year-old girl disappears from her home. No forced entry. No signs of struggle.
No suspect. Pause.
A cold case. The words settled into the room, heavy with decades. And for nearly 30 years, that's where it stayed. The narrative moved carefully, step by step, not rushing, not dramatizing, just building. Evidence.
Timeline.
Scene reconstruction. Photos appeared on screens. Grainy, dated, but still sharp enough to cut through memory. The Carter house, the bedroom, the woodland where Emily was found. Each image pulled the room deeper into that night. And then the turning point. DNA. The prosecution explained it with precision, not as magic, not as sudden revelation, but as something patient, something that had waited for science to catch up. Recovered in 1994, the attorney said. Tested again decades later using modern genetic genealogy. Jurors leaned forward. Because this wasn't theory. This was connection. Family trees mapped from fragments. Distant relatives unknowingly leading investigators closer. Each step narrowing the field until one name remained. Daniel Reeves. The same name that had once appeared in early reports and then faded. Until now. The defense didn't interrupt. They watched. Because their strategy wasn't to deny the presence of DNA. It was to challenge what it meant. Cross-examination came sharp. DNA can transfer, the defense argued. It doesn't automatically prove how or when it got there. A technical truth. But in this case, the context mattered. Because the DNA wasn't found in isolation. It was found in a place that told its own story. And that story aligned with everything else. The prosecution called witnesses next. Old neighbors, former investigators, people who had stood in the same streets back in 1994, now recounting moments they hadn't thought about in decades. One by one, they painted a picture. Not of a monster, but of proximity. He was there, one witness said. Always around, another added. He helped search, someone else recalled. Each statement, on its own, was harmless. Together, they formed something else. Presence. Consistency. Opportunity. Then came the detectives. Past and present. The original investigators described the early days of the case. The confusion. The lack of evidence. The frustration of knowing something was wrong but not being able to prove it. We had suspicions, one admitted. But suspicion isn't enough. The current detective followed. He spoke about reopening the case, about the evidence box, about the decision to test the DNA again.
No dramatics.
Just process. But process, in this case, was everything. Because it bridged the gap between 1994 and now. It explained how a case could sleep for decades and then wake up with clarity. And then, the moment the room had been waiting for. The lab analyst. The person who turned fragments into certainty. They explained the match. Not vaguely. Not cautiously.
Directly.
The probability of the DNA belonging to someone other than the defendant is effectively zero. No room for interpretation. No space for doubt. Just a line drawn between evidence and identity. Daniel Reeves didn't react. Not visibly. But something in the room shifted. Because the science had spoken. And science doesn't forget. The defense adjusted. They had to. If they couldn't break the evidence, they could reshape the narrative. They leaned into uncertainty. Where is the motive, they asked. Where is the explanation? Because even now, after everything, one thing remained missing.
Why?
They pointed to the gaps in Daniel's statements, the inconsistencies, the lack of a clear, coherent confession. If even the defendant cannot explain what happened, the attorney argued, how can the prosecution claim certainty? It was a calculated move. Because uncertainty can create doubt. And doubt is enough. But the prosecution didn't need motive to prove action. They returned to what they had. The timeline. The location. The DNA. And the fact that for 30 years, no alternative explanation had ever come close to fitting. Then came the most difficult part. Emily's family. They didn't speak immediately. They didn't need to. Their presence alone carried weight. But when her mother finally took the stand, the room changed in a way no piece of evidence ever could. Her voice wasn't loud.
It didn't need to be. She spoke about that night.
The call, the moment she realized something was wrong. She spoke about the years that followed, the waiting, the not knowing, the way time doesn't heal when there's no answer, only stretches the pain into something quieter, but no less sharp. And then she looked at him. Not with anger, not with hatred, but with something harder to define. Recognition. As if she had always known or always feared that the answer would be close. Too close. The defense didn't cross-examine her for long. Some things don't need to be challenged. They only need to be heard. As the trial continued, the room filled with layers.
Facts.
Memories. Interpretations. Each one pulling in a slightly different direction, but all circling the same center. Daniel Reeves. A man who had lived among them. A man who now sat at the center of a story that refused to simplify itself. Because even as the evidence stacked higher, something remained unresolved. Not legally, but psychologically. This wasn't a case that offered clean edges. It blurred. Between intention and impulse. Between planning and opportunity. Between who he appeared to be and what he had done. And that blur made it harder to process. Harder to accept. Because people want patterns. They want warning signs. They want something they can point to and say, that's where it went wrong. But here there was no clear line. Just a moment. A decision. And the silence that followed. As closing arguments approached, the tension in the courtroom didn't rise. It settled. Like something heavy finally coming to rest. The prosecution stood firm. This case isn't about speculation, they said. It's about evidence. It's about truth that waited nearly 30 years to be heard. The defense responded with equal control. This case is about doubt, they said. And doubt still exists. Two narratives. One outcome. And a jury tasked with choosing between them. Outside, the town waited. Not for news. For resolution. But resolution, like everything else in this case, wasn't simple. Because no matter what the verdict would be, nothing could return to what it was. Not the town. Not the family. Not the memory of a night that had never truly ended. And as the courtroom doors closed for deliberation, one thing became clear. The case had finally moved forward. But the weight of it was far from over. The jury didn't speak. Not at first. They filed out of the courtroom in silence, 12 people carrying something heavier than any evidence presented over the past days. Because now the case no longer belonged to detectives or attorneys or even the judge. It belonged to them. The door closed behind them with a sound that felt final, too final. Inside that room, there would be no cameras, no spectators, no voices except their own. Outside, everything slowed. The courtroom remained filled, but the energy shifted. Conversations dropped into whispers. Movements became smaller, quieter. Even the air felt different, thicker, as if everyone was holding the same breath, waiting for something none of them could control anymore. Daniel Reeves didn't move. He sat exactly as he had throughout the trial. Hands folded, eyes forward.
Still.
But stillness, in this moment, wasn't calm. It was containment. Across the room, Emily Carter's family stayed close together, not speaking much. They didn't need to. 30 years of waiting had already said everything words could. Time began to stretch. Minutes turned into something longer, undefined, heavy. Because deliberation isn't just about facts. It's about interpretation. Inside that room, the jury would go over everything again: the timeline, the DNA, the inconsistencies, the absence of motive. Each detail weighed, examined, challenged. The DNA. That was the anchor. It placed Daniel inside the story in a way nothing else could. But the defense had done its work. They had introduced questions. Not enough to erase the evidence, but enough to complicate it. And complication creates space. Space for doubt. The question now wasn't what happened. It was whether the jury believed they understood it well enough to decide. Hours passed. The sun shifted outside, light moving across the courtroom floor in slow, deliberate patterns. People came and went. Reporters stepped outside, then returned. Phones buzzed quietly, updates sent, speculation building beyond those walls. Inside, nothing changed. Until it did. A single movement. The bailiff stepping forward. A quiet exchange with the judge. Then, the jury has reached a verdict. The words landed like impact. Immediate.
Sharp.
Final. Everyone stood. Chairs scraped softly against the floor, the sound echoing louder than it should have. The doors opened, and the jury filed back in one by one, faces controlled, unreadable. No one looked at Daniel. Not directly. But the weight of what they carried was visible. They took their seats. The foreperson held the envelope. A simple object. Paper.
Thin. Ordinary.
But inside it everything. The judge nodded. You may read the verdict. Silence fell again, deeper this time. The kind that presses in from all sides. The foreperson opened the envelope. A pause. Just long enough for every person in that room to feel it. In the matter of the state versus Daniel Reeves. A breath. On the charge of first-degree murder. Another pause. And then, we find the defendant. Time fractured. For a split second, everything stopped existing in a straight line. Sound dulled. Movement slowed. Every heartbeat in the room seemed to align into a single, suspended moment. Guilty. The word didn't echo. It landed.
Heavy.
Absolute. Irreversible. No outburst followed. No immediate reaction. Just a shift. A collective exhale that had been building for nearly 30 years. Daniel Reeves didn't react.
Not outwardly. No visible flinch.
No sudden movement. Just the same stillness, but now it meant something else. Finality. Across the room, Emily's mother closed her eyes. Not in relief. Not entirely. Because relief suggests something has been restored. And nothing had been. But there was something else. An end to the question. An end to the not knowing. And sometimes that's the closest thing to peace that exists. The judge continued, voice steady, moving the process forward. Sentencing would follow. Formalities. Legal structures. Necessary steps. But the moment had already happened. The verdict had already done what it needed to do. Outside, the news spread instantly. Guilty. The word moved through the town, through the state, through every screen and headline connected to the case. A cold case.
Solved.
But even that phrase felt incomplete. Because solved suggests clarity. And this case still carried shadows. Inside the courtroom, proceedings wrapped with precision. Controlled. Structured. But underneath, something less defined lingered. Because conviction doesn't answer everything. It confirms action. It assigns responsibility. But it doesn't always explain. And explanation was still missing. As Daniel was led away, he didn't look back. Not at the jury. Not at the family. Not at the room where his life had just been redefined. He moved forward. Same pace. Same composure. As if the outcome, in some way, had already been accepted long before this moment arrived. That detail didn't go unnoticed, because it raised a question no verdict could answer. When had this truly ended for him? Was it that night in 1994? Or had he been carrying this outcome, quietly, invisibly, every day since? The Carter family remained seated for a moment longer. Not because they had to, but because standing meant leaving. And leaving meant stepping back into a world where the case was no longer active, but still present. They had waited nearly 3 decades for this moment. And now that it had come, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a shift. From uncertainty to something else. Something heavier. Because knowing the truth doesn't erase the past. It just changes how you carry it. Outside, the town didn't celebrate. There were no cheers, no public relief. Just a quiet acknowledgement. Because the story they had lived with for so long had finally reached a point of resolution, but not closure. Closure suggests something has been completed. Finished. Put away. This wasn't that. This was something that would stay. In memory. In conversation. In the way people looked at each other just a little differently now. Because trust, once broken like this, doesn't fully return. It reshapes.
Subtly. Permanently.
And as the sun began to set over the same streets that had once filled with search parties and unanswered questions, one truth settled in deeper than any verdict. The danger had never come from the outside. It had been there all along. Quiet.
Familiar.
Unseen. Until it wasn't. And even now, with the case finally decided, with the name finally attached, with the truth finally spoken, the feeling remained. Not fear. Not exactly. Something quieter. Something that lingers long after the story ends. Because some cases don't leave behind answers. They leave behind echoes. And those echoes don't fade. After the verdict, the town didn't return to normal. It tried. Morning routines resumed. Coffee brewed. Cars rolled out of driveways at the same hours they always had. Children walked to school. Conversations picked up where they had been left before the trial began. But something underneath had shifted. Not loudly. Not visibly. Just enough to make everything feel slightly off. Because the story, after 30 years of silence, had finally spoken, and what it said didn't settle neatly into memory. It spread. Into homes. Into thoughts. Into the spaces between ordinary moments. People started revisiting the past without meaning to. A wave from across the street suddenly felt different. A casual conversation, years ago, replayed with new weight. A moment that once meant nothing now carried something else, something unspoken, but impossible to ignore. Daniel Reeves had not been a stranger. And that detail refused to stay quiet. At the Carter house, time moved differently. The verdict had closed one door, but it had opened another, one that led not to answers, but to reflection. Emily's room had remained untouched for years. Not preserved like a museum, not frozen deliberately, but unchanged in the way grief sometimes keeps things suspended. After the trial, her mother stood in the doorway longer than usual. Looking. Not for clues. Not for meaning. Just looking. Because now, she knew who had walked through that door. Who had stood in that space. And that knowledge altered everything about it. The light felt different. The silence felt different. Even the air carried something heavier. Grief doesn't end with justice. It changes shape. In another part of town, conversations shifted tone. People spoke quieter when his name came up. Not out of fear. Out of discomfort. Because it forced a question no one wanted to fully confront. How well do you really know the people around you? The answer now felt less certain than it had ever been. Investigators, even after the conviction, didn't stop. Because the case had been solved but not completely understood. And understanding matters. They returned to the files again, not looking for guilt, but for clarity. For anything that might explain the gap between who Daniel appeared to be and what he had done. Psychological evaluations began. Experts reviewed his behavior, his statements, his patterns or the lack of them. Because what stood out wasn't escalation. It wasn't repetition. It was isolation. A single act.
Contained.
Unrepeated. That detail unsettled even seasoned professionals. Because patterns are easier to process. Patterns suggest predictability. But this didn't. One expert described it as compartmentalization to an extreme degree. The ability to separate action from identity. To commit something irreversible and then step back into a life that showed no visible fracture.
To carry it.
Quietly. Completely. For decades. That kind of separation isn't common. And it doesn't happen by accident. But even with analysis, even with expertise, the same question kept resurfacing.
Why?
Back in the interrogation transcripts, investigators searched again for something they might have missed. A word. A phrase. Anything that pointed toward motive. But the answers remained the same. I don't know. I didn't plan it. Fragments.
Gaps.
Absence where explanation should have been. Some believed it was intentional. A refusal to give meaning to something that couldn't be justified. Others believed it was genuine. That even he didn't fully understand the moment when everything shifted. But either way, the result didn't change. And the lack of clarity only deepened the unease. Because people want reasons. They want something they can hold on to. Something that explains the unexplainable. But sometimes that doesn't exist. Media coverage continued, but the tone evolved. The headlines moved from arrest and verdict to something quieter. Aftermath. Impact. Community reflection. Interviews with residents revealed something consistent. No one had seen it coming. Not really. There had been no defining moment. No clear warning sign. Just a man who lived among them. Until one day, they learned who he really was. And that realization didn't stay confined to this case. It extended outward. Into other assumptions. Other certainties. Other beliefs about safety. Because if something like this could exist unnoticed for so long, what else could? That question didn't have an answer. But it didn't go away either. At the prison where Daniel was now held, routine replaced unpredictability. Structured days. Controlled movement. A life defined by boundaries. But even there, he remained consistent.
Calm.
Measured.
Reserved. No outbursts.
No visible signs of regret. At least, not in a way that others could easily recognize. He spoke little. And when he did, it was controlled. Deliberate. As if every word passed through the same filter it always had. Nothing unnecessary. Nothing revealing. That consistency, even now, added to the complexity. Because people expect change after conviction. Emotion. Reaction. Something that signals awareness of what has been lost. But in this case, the absence of that reaction became its own kind of statement. Back in the town, life continued. It had to. Time doesn't stop, even when something inside it does. But the case left behind something permanent. Not just in memory. In perspective. People locked their doors more often. Not out of panic. Out of awareness. Conversations about trust became more cautious. More measured. Because trust, once unquestioned, now carried conditions. And those conditions changed how people moved through their own lives. The Carter family began to speak publicly, but not often. When they did, it wasn't about the trial. It wasn't about the evidence.
It was about Emily. Who she was.
What she loved. What had been taken. Because cases like this have a way of reducing people to events. To headlines. To moments defined by tragedy. And they wanted something else to remain. Something human. Something real. As time passed, the case began to settle into history. Documented. Recorded. Analyzed. A cold case that had been solved. But even as it moved into that category, it didn't lose its weight. Because the details didn't fade. They stayed. In the way the story was told. In the way it was remembered. And in the way it continued to affect those who had lived through it. Some cases end with answers. This one ended with something else. Recognition. Of how close the truth had always been. Of how long it had remained hidden. And of how, even when it finally surfaced, it didn't bring everything with it. Because some parts of the story never fully come into view. They remain just out of reach. Not invisible. But not entirely clear either. And that lack of clarity, that space where explanation should be, is what stays the longest. Long after the verdict. Long after the headlines. Long after the case is officially closed. Because what the story left behind wasn't just a solved crime. It was a shift. Quiet.
Permanent.
And impossible to undo. Even after the verdict, the case refused to settle. Because truth had been identified. But it had not been fully understood. And that difference, small on paper, but vast in reality, left space for something else to grow. Questions. Not the loud kind. Not the kind shouted across courtrooms or printed in headlines. The quiet ones. The kind that surface late at night, when everything else has gone still. The kind that don't demand answers, but refuse to disappear without them. Investigators had closed the file officially. But unofficially, some of them kept going. Because there were details, small, almost invisible details, that didn't align perfectly. Not enough to overturn the case. But enough to keep the edges from feeling complete.
One of those details was time.
The window between Emily's last known moment and the 911 call remained tight. Too tight, some argued, for everything that was believed to have happened. The prosecution had presented a version that worked. That fit. That made sense within the structure of the evidence. But fit doesn't always mean exact. And exactness matters especially in cases that stretch across decades. Some investigators revisited the timeline again, not to challenge the verdict, but to test its limits. Could one person, acting alone, move that quickly, that efficiently, without error? The answer, technically, was yes. But practically, it raised tension. Because the margin for mistake would have been razor-thin.
No noise. No witnesses. No interruption.
Every step executed with control. That level of control suggests something. Experience. Or preparation. But Daniel had claimed neither. I didn't plan it. Those words still lingered. Not because they contradicted the evidence, but because they complicated it. If it wasn't planned, then how did it unfold so cleanly? Another detail surfaced in quiet discussions. The location. The woodland where Emily was found had been described as familiar, local, accessible. But when investigators revisited the site years later, mapping it with modern precision, something became clearer. There were multiple access points, paths not immediately visible, routes that required knowledge, not just of the area, but of how to move through it without being seen. Daniel had lived nearby. He knew the land. But did he know it that well? Or had he learned it before that night? That question opened a door to something else. Not a second suspect, but a second layer. Because familiarity isn't always built in a moment. Sometimes it develops over time, quietly, without anyone noticing. And that idea shifted the way some people viewed the case. Not as a single, isolated event, but as something that may have had roots, subtle, invisible roots, leading up to that night. Behavioral analysts revisited his profile. They looked for patterns not in action but in attention. Moments where he may have observed,
watched,
positioned himself closer to the Carter family's routine. Not in a way that raised alarms, but in a way that placed him within reach. No direct evidence confirmed it. But absence of evidence doesn't erase possibility. It just leaves it unresolved. Then there was the question of silence. For nearly 30 years, Daniel Reeves had lived with what he had done.
no confession, no sleep, no visible crack.
That level of control over time suggested something deeper than impulse. It suggested discipline. And discipline, in this context, becomes its own kind of mystery. Because it requires consistency, awareness, an understanding of risk. Some experts argued that the lack of further incidents pointed toward a singular break, a moment where something snapped and then reset. Others disagreed. They suggested that what appeared as absence might simply be undetected. Because not all actions leave evidence. Not all patterns are visible. And not all stories are fully known. That theory never moved beyond speculation. But it didn't disappear either. It lingered. Quietly. Like everything else in this case. Back in the town, people formed their own interpretations. Not out of obsession, but out of necessity. Because when a story doesn't explain itself completely, people fill in the gaps. Some believed it had been purely opportunistic, a moment that presented itself and was taken. Others believed it had been building, not planned in detail, but not entirely random either. A line crossed after time spent standing near it, watching it,
thinking about it,
and then eventually stepping over. Neither version could be proven fully. And maybe that was the point. Because certainty, in cases like this, is rarely absolute. It exists within boundaries, defined by evidence, limited by what can be shown. Everything beyond that remains open. One of the most debated details came from something almost overlooked. A statement Daniel made during interrogation. I came back. Not emphasized. Not expanded. Just said. And then left behind. But that phrase raised a question. Came back from where? Had he left the area and returned? Had there been a moment of hesitation? A break in the sequence that suggested something more complex than a single continuous act? Investigators couldn't fully reconstruct that part. Time had eroded too much. Memory had blurred too far. But the phrase remained.
Small.
Incomplete. And impossible to ignore. Because sometimes the smallest details carry the most weight. Not because they answer questions, but because they point to the existence of questions that haven't been asked yet. As years moved forward, the case began to take on a different life. Not just as a solved crime, but as a subject of analysis, study, discussion. used in training, referenced in lectures, because it represented something rare. A case where the answer arrived decades later, but still left space for uncertainty. And that uncertainty became part of its identity. Not a flaw, but a feature. A reminder that even when the central truth is known, the full picture isn't always visible. For the Carter family, those questions mattered less. Not because they weren't aware of them, but because they had reached a point where answers had limits. They had what they needed most:
a name,
a face, a truth that could no longer hide. Everything beyond that was secondary. But for others, investigators, analysts, even people in the town, the questions stayed alive. Not loudly. Not urgently. Just present. Because this case didn't just challenge the idea of justice. It challenged the idea of understanding. And those are not the same thing. As time continued to move, one thing became clear. The case was closed. But it wasn't finished. Because stories like this don't end when the verdict is read. They continue. In thought. In interpretation. In the quiet spaces where certainty fades and something else takes its place. Something harder to define. Something that doesn't resolve neatly. And maybe that's why, even now, long after the arrest, long after the trial, long after the word guilty settled into record, the case still feels unfinished. Not because the truth is missing, but because some parts of it never fully arrive. Years after the verdict, the name Daniel Reeves slowly disappeared from the headlines. That is what happens when a story stops being new. The cameras leave. The reporters move on. The world finds another tragedy, another mystery, another headline demanding attention. But in the quiet corners of Texas, the case never truly left. Because some stories are not remembered because they remain unsolved. They are remembered because they reveal something uncomfortable about the world. Something people would rather not believe. That danger does not always arrive with warning signs. Sometimes it arrives with a familiar face. Sometimes it stands beside you while you search for the person it took. And sometimes the truth waits decades before it finally speaks. The Carter case became one of those stories. A reminder that time does not always erase evidence. Sometimes it preserves it. For investigators who worked on the case, the DNA breakthrough represented more than a conviction. It represented a promise fulfilled. A promise made back in 1994 when detectives stood inside that house and looked at a family searching for answers they could not provide. They had collected everything they could. Every photograph. Every statement. Every piece of physical evidence. But at the time, they were fighting against limitations. Technology had not caught up. The answers existed somewhere. But they were locked behind a door no one could open. Until decades later. The evidence box that once represented frustration became the key. The same samples that sat untouched for years became the voice Emily never had. And that reality changed how investigators looked at cold cases everywhere. Because this case proved something powerful. A case is never truly silent. It is only waiting. Waiting for new science. New perspectives. New people willing to look again. But for the people who lived through it, the breakthrough brought complicated emotions. Because solving a cold case is not the same as healing from it. The two are often confused. People hear the words arrest made or conviction secured and assume the story has reached its natural ending. But for families who lose someone, there is no natural ending. There is only adaptation. Learning how to live around the absence. Learning how to carry a memory that never becomes lighter. Emily was still 16 years old in their memories. She never aged. Never changed. Never experienced the years that passed for everyone else. The world moved forward. But a part of their lives remained trapped in that summer night in 1994. The verdict could not change that. The arrest could not change that. Even the truth could not change that. It could only answer one question.
Who?
And sometimes, one answer creates 1,000 more. Investigators later reflected on the most disturbing aspect of the case. It was not just that the offender was someone nearby. It was how ordinary everything looked. There was no dramatic confrontation.
No obvious villain.
No moment where everyone suddenly understood what was happening. Life continued around the crime. Neighbors went to work. Families ate dinner. People greeted each other. And somewhere inside that ordinary world was a secret no one could see. That was the detail that stayed with many people. Not the evidence. Not the courtroom. The normal moments. Because normal moments are where trust lives. And when trust is broken, people begin questioning everything. The case also changed the way investigators approached old files. Before, cold cases were often viewed through the limitations of the past. What was missed? What was unavailable? What evidence was too old to matter? But advancements in forensic science created a different perspective. The past was no longer frozen. It could be revisited, re-examined, reinterpreted. A fingerprint once considered useless could become valuable. A DNA sample once considered incomplete could become decisive. A forgotten box in a storage room could become the beginning of the end. The Carter investigation became part of a larger movement. A reminder that thousands of cases sitting in archives were not necessarily impossible. They were simply unfinished. But even with progress, one reality remained. Science can identify a person. It cannot always explain them. That was the part that continued to haunt those who followed the case. Daniel Reeves had been identified. The evidence was overwhelming. The verdict was clear. But the human question remained. What happens inside someone before they cross a line they can never uncross? Was it a moment? A thought? A decision made seconds before action? Or something that existed silently long before anyone noticed? No investigation could fully answer that. Because the human mind can hide places even evidence cannot reach. And perhaps that was the final mystery left behind. Not who. Not where.
Not when. But how.
How someone could return to ordinary life after committing an extraordinary act. How someone could stand among people searching for a missing girl while carrying the truth inside. How someone could wake up every morning for decades knowing that eventually time might catch up. Because time had caught up. It always had the potential to. The question was never whether the evidence would speak. Only when. Years later, residents still remembered the feeling that followed the arrest. Not celebration. Not satisfaction. Something more complicated. A mixture of relief and disbelief. Because solving the case restored one thing.
Truth.
But it also destroyed another. The illusion of certainty. Before the arrest, people believed they understood their community. After the arrest, they understood something else. That appearances are incomplete. That familiarity is not always safety. That sometimes the person closest to the story is the person hiding the most. And that lesson stayed. Not as fear, but as awareness. The streets where Emily grew up remained the same. The houses remained standing. The seasons continued changing. But the story attached to that place became permanent. A cold case solved after nearly 30 years. A DNA breakthrough that finally exposed the truth. A trusted neighbor revealed as the person no one wanted to imagine. And beneath all of it, a 16-year-old girl whose life was reduced to a headline for far too long. That was the part her family wanted remembered most. Not the investigation. Not the suspect. Not the courtroom.
Emily.
The person before the tragedy. The daughter. The friend. The girl with dreams that never had the chance to become memories. Because every case has evidence. Every investigation has suspects. Every courtroom has arguments. But behind every file number is a person. And behind every headline is a life. The Carter case may have ended in court. But the story it left behind continued. A warning. A reminder. A message carried forward through time. That some secrets can survive for years. Some truths can hide beneath ordinary days. But eventually, evidence finds a way. The past finds a way. And the voices that were silenced find a way to be heard. The final pages of a case were written in a courtroom. But the story itself was written somewhere else. In the empty streets where search teams once walked. In the rooms where families waited beside silent phones. In the evidence storage facility where a forgotten box sat for decades, carrying a secret no one could unlock. Because cold cases are not just investigations. They are battles against time. And time is undefeated until someone finds a way to fight back. For years, the Carter case represented everything investigators feared. A victim with no justice. A family without answers. A community forced to live beside an unanswered question. But when the DNA breakthrough finally came, it changed more than one case. It changed the way people looked at the past. Because the past was no longer something that disappeared. It could return. Sometimes suddenly. Sometimes decades later. And when it returned, it brought everything with it. The evidence. The memories. The pain. The truth. After the conviction, investigators began reviewing every stage of the original investigation. Not because they questioned the outcome. They didn't. The evidence had spoken. The verdict had confirmed it. But they wanted to understand the journey. Where had the case stalled? What prevented the answer from arriving sooner? And, perhaps most importantly, what allowed the truth to remain hidden for so long? The answer was not one mistake. It was a combination of time, technology, and circumstance. In 1994, investigators had worked with the tools available to them. They followed procedures. They collected evidence. They interviewed witnesses. They pursued every lead they could. But some doors simply could not be opened yet. The DNA existed. The truth existed. But the connection between them did not. Not until science advanced. Not until technology created a bridge between decades. And that became one of the most powerful lessons from the case. Justice is sometimes delayed not because people stop searching. Sometimes it is delayed because the world has not invented the answer yet. That reality changed the way many families viewed their own cold cases. For years, some believed forgotten evidence meant forgotten victims. But the Carter case proved otherwise. A box on a shelf could still hold a voice. A sample collected decades earlier could still tell a story. A mystery that seemed impossible could still move. And that possibility became a source of hope. But hope came with complexity. Because every solved case creates another emotional battle. The moment families dream about, the moment they finally learn the truth, is also the moment they have to face the truth completely. There is no more uncertainty. No more imagining different possibilities. No more hoping for a different ending. The unknown disappears. And sometimes the truth is heavier than the question. For Emily's family, that was the reality. For years, they had lived with possibilities. Maybe she had escaped. Maybe someone would find her. Maybe a new clue would appear. Maybe tomorrow would bring an answer. Then tomorrow finally arrived. But it brought something they never wanted.
A name.
A face. A person they knew. Someone who had been close enough to enter their world. That kind of truth changes the way people remember. Because memory is not fixed. It evolves. A conversation from years ago can suddenly feel different. A simple interaction can become something darker. A familiar face can become connected to the worst moment of a family's life. And that is the unique pain of cases involving trusted individuals. The betrayal is not only what happened. It is what comes after. The rebuilding of reality. The understanding that the world you knew was never exactly the world you believed it was. In the years following the conviction, documentaries, reports, and interviews continued exploring the case. People wanted to understand. Not because they doubted what happened, but because they wanted to understand how something like this could exist unnoticed. How someone could appear ordinary while carrying something extraordinary. How a person could maintain an image for so long. Experts explained that many offenders do not fit the images people expect. They do not always look dangerous. They do not always behave suspiciously. They often exist within normal environments. They work. They socialize. They create relationships. And that is precisely what allows them to remain hidden. The case became a reminder that human behavior is complicated. That evil does not always announce itself. Sometimes it hides behind routine, behind politeness, behind familiarity. And that was the lesson people carried forward. Not paranoia. Not fear. Awareness. Meanwhile, the investigation itself became a reference point for future cold cases. The methods used to connect old evidence with modern technology demonstrated what was possible. Families across the country began asking new questions about their own unresolved cases. Could old evidence still be tested? Could forgotten files still contain answers? Could science finally reveal what time had hidden? The answer, more often than before, was yes. Because every year brought new advancements. Better databases. More accurate analysis. Improved techniques. The future was slowly becoming a tool for solving the past. And that was perhaps the most unexpected chapter of the Carter case. A tragedy from 1994 helped shape the way future investigations would be approached. A victim whose story began with loss became part of a movement toward answers. But even with that legacy, one thing remained unchanged. Emily was not a case. She was not evidence. She was not a headline. She was a person. That was the message her family continued to protect. Because over time, crime stories can become focused on the wrong things. The suspect. The investigation. The mystery. The shock. But behind every one of those elements is a life interrupted. A future erased. A family changed forever. The true measure of justice is not only finding who is responsible, it is remembering who is lost. And Emily Carter's name continued because people refused to let her become just another file. Her story remained because it represented something bigger. The importance of persistence. The power of science. The promise that time does not always win. Years after the crime, the town looked different. Not physically. The same roads remained. The same buildings stood. The same Texas skies stretched above the same neighborhoods. But emotionally, the place had changed. Because everyone who lived through it carried a piece of that history. A reminder of one summer night. One unanswered question. One cold case that refused to disappear. And eventually, one breakthrough that changed everything. The case was solved. The evidence was complete. The verdict was recorded. But the story continued in another way. as a warning, as a lesson, as proof that even when the world moves on, some truths remain waiting. Waiting in forgotten files. Waiting in silent evidence rooms. Waiting for the moment when someone finally looks again. Because sometimes the smallest piece of evidence can carry the biggest answer. Sometimes decades of silence can be broken by a single discovery. And sometimes the past does not stay buried. It comes back.
It speaks.
And it demands to be heard. The world eventually moved forward. It always does. Even the darkest stories slowly become part of history. The headlines fade. The cameras disappear. The names become quieter when spoken. But some cases leave behind a mark that time cannot erase. The Carter case was one of them. Not because it remained unsolved. Not because the killer was never found. But because of what the case revealed after the answer finally arrived. It revealed the power of patience, the importance of evidence, and the terrifying reality that sometimes the truth is closer than anyone ever imagined. For nearly 30 years, the town lived with a question hanging over it. What happened to Emily Carter? That question shaped conversations. It shaped memories. It shaped the way people looked at an ordinary night in 1994 that suddenly became the dividing line between before and after. Before Emily disappeared, the neighborhood was just a neighborhood. Afterward, it became a place connected to a mystery. A place where every street carried a memory. Every corner carried a possibility. And every passing year without answers added another layer of silence. But silence does not mean nothing is happening. Beneath the surface, the case remained alive. Evidence remained preserved. Records remained stored. And somewhere inside all those forgotten details was the piece that would eventually change everything. The DNA breakthrough did not happen because investigators stopped looking at the past. It happened because they finally found a way to see the past differently. That difference was everything. In the early years, the investigation depended on traditional methods. Interviews, witness accounts, physical evidence, human memory. But memory changes. People forget details. People misremember moments. People fill gaps without realizing they are doing it. Evidence, however, waits. It does not become emotional. It does not become tired. It does not decide that too much time has passed. It simply remains. And that was the power of what had been collected in 1994. A silent witness, waiting for the right question. When modern technology finally examined the evidence again, the case transformed. The same material that once represented frustration became the foundation of justice. And for investigators across the country, it became another reminder that cold cases are not dead cases. They are unfinished stories. Stories waiting for a final chapter. But the final chapter of the Carter case was never just about the arrest. It was about what happened afterward. Because when a suspect is identified after decades, the world often expects a dramatic ending. A confession. A revelation. A complete explanation. But reality is rarely that simple. Sometimes justice arrives without giving every answer. Sometimes the most important truth is also the hardest one. The truth of who did it. The truth of what was taken. The truth that there is no way to undo what happened. That was the emotional reality facing everyone connected to Emily's story. The conviction brought certainty. But certainty does not erase pain. It does not return lost years. It does not restore the future that disappeared on one summer night. It only removes the burden of wondering. And for many families of victims, that is both powerful and painful. Because wondering, no matter how painful, becomes a way of holding on to hope. When the answer comes, hope changes. It becomes remembrance. It becomes acceptance. It becomes learning how to carry a truth that can never be changed. In the years after the trial, Emily's story became less about the person who took her life and more about the person she was. That mattered. Because tragedy has a way of replacing identity. A victim becomes a headline, a photograph, a case number, a name attached to an investigation. But Emily was more than that. She was a daughter, a friend, a teenager with dreams, a person whose life existed beyond the night that ended it. Her family continued reminding people of that, because they knew something important. The final memory of a person should not belong to the person who harmed them. It should belong to the person they were. That idea changed the way many people viewed the case. It was no longer only about a crime committed decades earlier. It was about a life remembered decades later. And that distinction mattered. Meanwhile, investigators continued studying the case from another perspective. Not to find another suspect. Not to challenge the conviction. But to understand the behavior surrounding it. How could someone maintain an ordinary life after such an act? How could someone interact with a community while carrying a secret of that magnitude? There were no easy answers. Human behavior rarely provides them. Experts explained that some individuals are capable of separating parts of themselves in ways others find impossible to understand. They can perform normal routines, hold conversations, maintain relationships, while hiding something deeply disturbing. That ability is one of the most unsettling aspects of certain crimes, because it challenges the assumption that people reveal themselves through obvious signs. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they do not. Sometimes the person everyone fears is a stranger. And sometimes the person no one questions is the one who should have been examined more closely. That reality became one of the strongest lessons from the case. Trust is necessary. Communities cannot function without it. But trust must exist alongside awareness. Because appearances tell only part of the story. The case also changed conversations around forensic science. For decades, technology had been viewed as something that solved current crimes. But the Carter investigation showed another possibility. Technology could reach backward. It could travel across years. It could connect moments separated by decades. A sample collected in the past could speak in the present. A forgotten piece of evidence could become the turning point. And that idea gave hope to countless families still waiting. Because somewhere in countless evidence rooms across the country, there are still boxes. Still files. Still unanswered questions. And inside some of them may be the answers people have been searching for. The Carter case became proof that time is not always the enemy. Sometimes, time is the thing that allows justice to arrive. Because without decades of scientific advancement, the truth might have remained hidden. The same years that created distance also created opportunity. And eventually the distance closed. The past reached the present. The evidence found its voice. And the silence ended. But even after everything, the arrest, the trial, the conviction, the story remained haunting for one reason. The person responsible had been there all along. Not hidden in another city. Not lost somewhere unknown. Present.
Familiar.
Part of the same community. That realization became the final shadow over the case. Because it forced people to confront something uncomfortable. The world is not always divided between good people and obvious danger. Sometimes the line is harder to see. Sometimes the truth hides behind ordinary moments. And sometimes, the greatest mysteries are not created by distance. They are created by closeness. Today, the Carter case stands as a reminder. A reminder that victims deserve answers. Families deserve justice. And no matter how much time passes, the search should never be considered hopeless. Because evidence remembers. Science advances. And the truth has a way of returning. Maybe not quickly. Maybe not when people expect it. But eventually. After years of silence. After decades of waiting. The voices that were lost can still be heard. And when they are, the world finally listens. The final chapter of the Carter case was never really about the moment the handcuffs closed. It was never just about a courtroom, a verdict, a prison sentence. Those were the official endings, the legal endings. But stories like this do not end when a judge delivers a final decision. They continue in the memories of the people who survived them, in the streets where they happened, in the questions that remain long after the answers arrive. Because some cases leave behind more than facts. They leave behind feelings. And the Carter case left behind one feeling stronger than anything else. A reminder. A reminder that time can hide the truth. But it cannot destroy it. For nearly 3 decades, the name Emily Carter represented an unanswered question. A photograph on a missing person poster. A face remembered by a community that refused to move on completely. A story repeated every few years when someone asked the same thing. How could this happen? How could there still be no answer? How could someone disappear and the truth disappear with them? But then, after years of silence, the answer arrived. Not through a confession. Not through a sudden witness. Not through a dramatic mistake. It arrived through science. A small piece of evidence collected in the past. A sample preserved through time. A discovery that proved one simple truth. The past is never truly gone. The evidence had been waiting. The family had been waiting. The community had been waiting. And when the moment finally came, decades of uncertainty collapsed into one undeniable reality. Daniel Reeves was responsible. The trusted neighbor. The familiar face. The person who existed close enough to become invisible. That was the detail people struggled with most. Not only what happened, but who it happened through. Because strangers are easier to understand. A stranger can be separated from everyday life. A stranger can be placed outside the circle of trust. But someone familiar changes the entire meaning of the story. It forces people to look back, to remember ordinary moments, to question memories they once considered harmless. And that is the lasting impact of the case. It did not just reveal a criminal. It revealed the danger of assumptions. The belief that people always show who they are. The belief that evil always announces itself. The belief that danger always looks different from everyone else. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it does not. Sometimes it looks ordinary. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it offers help. Sometimes it stands beside everyone searching for answers. And that is what made this case unforgettable. The truth was not hidden because it was far away. The truth was hidden because it was close. Too close. But even with that painful reality, the story did not belong to Daniel Reeves. It never should have. Because criminals often take more than a life. They take attention. They take the narrative. They become the center of the story. But Emily Carter was never just a victim in a case file. She was a person. A daughter. A friend. A young woman whose future existed before the tragedy interrupted it. And that is what remained after everything else faded. Not the suspect. Not the investigation. Not the courtroom arguments. Her. The people who loved her continued carrying that memory. Because justice is not only about punishment. It is about recognition. Recognition that a life mattered. Recognition that a person should not disappear into a statistic. Recognition that behind every cold case is someone who was once alive, someone who laughed, dreamed, and planned for a future they deserve to have. The Carter case also changed how people viewed unresolved crimes. For decades, cold cases were often associated with hopelessness. Old files, forgotten victims, questions with no answers. But this case challenged that belief. It showed that time does not always win. Technology can change. Methods can improve. Evidence can regain meaning. And sometimes the smallest detail can become the most important one. A trace. A sample. A fragment. Something overlooked for years. Something waiting for the right moment. The world of criminal investigation changed because of cases like this. Not overnight. Not through one single discovery, but through a gradual understanding that no case should be considered impossible simply because it is old. Because every year that passes creates distance. But it can also create opportunity. More advanced science. More powerful tools. More ways to uncover what was once hidden. That was the true legacy of the Carter case. Not only that justice was achieved, but that hope was restored. Hope for families still waiting. Hope for victims whose names remain attached to unanswered questions. Hope that somewhere, inside an old file or forgotten evidence room, the truth may still exist. Waiting. Years after the conviction, the town continued changing. People moved. New families arrived. New memories replaced old ones. But the story remained part of the community's history. Not as a source of fear, but as a reminder. A reminder that people matter. That cases matter. That forgotten does not mean finished. The streets looked the same. The houses stood where they always had. The Texas sky stretched above the same land. But everyone who remembered the case knew something important. That place had been changed forever. Because history is not only written by major events. Sometimes history is written by moments. One night. One disappearance. One question. One discovery decades later. And one final answer. The Carter case began with silence. A missing girl. An empty room. A family waiting for a phone call that never brought the news they wanted. It continued through years of frustration. Through unanswered questions. Through evidence sitting quietly while time moved forward. And it ended with something every cold case seeks. The truth. Not a perfect ending. Not a happy ending. Because some losses cannot be repaired. Some wounds do not disappear. But the truth matters. The truth gives a name to what happened. The truth restores a piece of what was taken. The truth tells families that their loved one was never forgotten. And perhaps that is the most important message left behind. A cold case is not just a file. It is a promise. A promise that someone is still searching. A promise that evidence still matters. A promise that time does not erase the need for justice. Because even after decades, even after the world moves on, even after memories begin to fade, some stories refuse to disappear. They wait. They survive. And eventually, they speak. The Carter case was one of those stories. A story of loss. A story of patience. A story of science catching up with the past. And a story proving that even the deepest silence can be broken. Because the truth may arrive late. It may arrive after years of waiting. It may arrive after everyone begins to believe it never will. But when it finally comes, it changes everything. And for Emily Carter, after decades of questions, the world finally heard the answer.